I was 30 minutes away from closing a $65 million deal when my boss's son fired me. Not for incompetence, not for misconduct, because his Instagram girlfriend needed my job. Here's the thing they didn't know. Those clients weren't just numbers on a spreadsheet. They were relationships I'd built over 24 years, and they were about to find out what happens when you put a social media expert in charge of complex corporate law. My name is Daniel Morrison, and at 49, I'd built my entire identity around being the most reliable M&A attorney at Caldwell & Partners. That Friday afternoon started like any other. Coffee at 6:30, desk by 7, reviewing the TechFlow Industries acquisition documents for what had to be the 40th time, $65 million. Not our biggest deal, but significant enough that I'd personally shepherded it through 7 months of negotiations. You know what kills me? Just 2 days earlier, I'd been having lunch with Patricia Wells at the Union League Club about this exact deal. We'd been sitting in the main dining room, and she'd mentioned how much her board appreciated having someone they could trust with their most complex transactions. Dan, you know how many lawyers I've worked with over the years, she'd said, cutting into her salmon. Most of them treat us like a transaction number. You actually understand our business. That conversation felt like a lifetime ago now, staring at the email notification that popped up at 4:15 p.m., not from my direct supervisor, Tony, who was in depositions all week, from Bryce Caldwell. Please come to my office immediately. Look, I knew this was coming. Bryce, 32 years old, Stanford MBA, son of our founding partner. He'd been installed as Chief Operating Officer 9 weeks ago, after what the firm newsletter called a comprehensive strategic review. Here's what that really meant. Daddy was tired of running the firm and handed it over to his kid who'd spent the last 4 years disrupting consulting firms in San Francisco. I'd actually tried to give him the benefit of the doubt initially. His presentation to the partners about modernizing client relations had some valid points about digital communication and efficiency. But then he'd started talking about AI integration and leveraging technological synergies, and I knew we were in trouble. I saved my work, straightened my tie, and walked down that long hallway to the corner office that used to belong to a partner with 45 years of experience. Bryce had completely redecorated. Gone were the law books and framed certificates, replaced by motivational posters about embracing disruption, and a standing desk with monitors that probably cost more than my monthly car payment. He didn't look up when I knocked. Sit. The chair across from his desk was deliberately low, a power play I'd seen in amateur management books. Bryce was scrolling through his phone, designer sneakers propped on the mahogany desk his grandfather had imported from Germany. His girlfriend Taylor sat in the corner, supposedly taking notes on her laptop, though I could see Instagram reflected in her screen. Daniel, he finally acknowledged me, setting down his phone like I was interrupting something important. We need to discuss your trajectory here. Is there an issue with the TechFlow acquisition? I can walk you through the regulatory compliance sections if you need clarification on the recent SEC updates. It's not about any specific deal. He leaned back, fingers steepled like he was conducting a board meeting. It's about digital evolution, generational alignment, the strategic direction we're taking this firm. Digital evolution, right? I'd billed more hours than any other non-partner for 6 consecutive years. My client retention rate was 94%. I'd brought in $8 million new business last year alone, including 3 Fortune 100 companies that had never worked with us before. But sure, let's talk about strategic alignment. I'm not following Bryce. Look, you're competent. No one's saying you're not competent. The way he said competent made it sound like a disease. But Caldwell & Partners is evolving. We need team players who understand innovation, automation, people who think beyond traditional paradigms. Here's what I wanted to say. That law firms succeeded by thinking inside very specific statutory and regulatory frameworks. That's literally what clients paid us for. Expertise in navigating those frameworks without getting them sued, fined, or criminally prosecuted. Here's what I actually said. What exactly are you saying? Today is your last day. Security will escort you out after you sign this. He slid a packet across the desk with the casual indifference of someone ordering coffee. Non-disclosure agreement. Non-compete clause. 7-month severance if you go quietly. My stomach dropped. You're firing me the day before TechFlow closes? Taylor will handle the transition. He checked his phone again, already mentally moved on from destroying my career. Taylor, his girlfriend from the wellness industry, who'd started 7 weeks ago as a client experience strategist. Last week, I'd overheard her asking our paralegal what due diligence meant. The woman had a marketing degree and a certificate in social media optimization. Taylor isn't licensed to practice law. She can't legally handle client transactions or provide legal advice. That's no longer your concern. Her smile was all teeth, no warmth. You have 1 hour to clear out your office. And Daniel, the NDA is non-negotiable. You discuss any client matters, any proprietary information, and we'll bury you in litigation. This firm has very deep pockets. I stood slowly, keeping my face neutral while my mind raced. 24 years. Nearly a quarter century of skipped family dinners, working through holidays, building relationships with 35 corporate clients who trusted me with their multi-million-dollar problems. 24 years of creating systems, templates, and processes that this firm ran on. Think about my son, Austin's tuition payment, $32,000 due in 8 weeks for Northwestern. Think about my daughter Sophie starting her senior year at Latin school, another $18,000 annually. Think about my mother in the assisted living facility, $2,400 monthly for her care. Think about the alimony payments to my ex-wife Linda that don't stop until I'm 62, all of it dependent on my income, my reputation, my career. 1 hour, Bryce repeated, his attention already back on his phone. Leave your key card with security. I walked back to my office in a daze. Through the glass walls, I could see my colleagues avoiding eye contact. Word traveled at light speed in law firms. I was toxic now, radioactive. 1 hour to pack up 24 years. I pulled out my personal laptop, the one I'd use for late-night work when the firm's ancient systems crashed. My personal phone with numbers I'd accumulated over decades of client relationships. My handwritten notes, the kind of institutional knowledge that couldn't be digitized. My reference books with margin notes from hundreds of deals. My coffee mug that said, "World's okay, Dad." A Father's Day gift from Sophie when she was 13. Here's what they couldn't pack into boxes: the relationships I'd built, the personal cell numbers in my phone, the trust earned through countless hours of meticulous work, the industry knowledge accumulated over nearly 25 years of M&A deals, regulatory compliance, and crisis management. As security watched me fill bankers' boxes, I thought about Patricia Wells, about how their CEO had specifically requested me after I'd saved them from a catastrophic SEC violation 4 years ago, about how she'd invited me to her daughter's wedding last summer, about how she had no idea that Monday, her $65 million acquisition would be handled by someone whose biggest legal experience was reading wellness blog posts about contract optimization. I signed the papers, took my boxes, handed over my key card, but as I walked out of Caldwell & Partners for the last time, past the marble lobby and the commissioned portraits of 3 generations of Caldwell lawyers, I wasn't thinking about what I'd lost. I was thinking about what they'd forgotten I still had, and about Tuesday's scheduled meeting of the Chicago M&A Bar Association, where 47 of the most powerful corporate lawyers in the Midwest would be very interested to hear why Daniel Morrison was suddenly available for new opportunities. I sat in my home office at 5:30 p.m., still wearing my suit, staring at the banker's boxes like they might explain what had just happened. The house felt too quiet for a Friday evening. Austin was back at Northwestern for spring semester, and Sophie was at her mother's place for the weekend. I should have been celebrating the TechFlow closing with Patricia and her team at Gibson's right now. Instead, I was unemployed with 13 years left until retirement. The shock was wearing off, replaced by something sharper, not just anger, clarity. I opened my laptop and started taking inventory of what I actually possessed versus what Caldwell & Partners thought they owned. The non-compete clause was 7 months, but I knew Illinois law better than Bryce did. Non-competes were difficult to enforce when termination was without cause, especially when you could prove bad faith. Firing someone to make room for an unqualified girlfriend definitely qualified as bad faith. First, my systems. Over 24 years, I'd developed comprehensive frameworks for M&A deals, SEC compliance templates, and regulatory change tracking systems. The firm had never asked me to transfer these to their servers, probably because no one there understood their value. They sat in my personal cloud storage, meticulously organized, my intellectual property created on my own time, refined through hundreds of transactions. Second, the relationships. I pulled out my personal phone and scrolled through the numbers. Patricia Wells, Jim Thompson from Midwest Manufacturing, Sarah Rodriguez at Great Lakes Holdings. 35 CEOs, CFOs, and general counsels who had my direct line because Caldwell's official channels meant waiting 4 days for a callback. These weren't just business cards from networking events. These were relationships built over decades. People who had invited me to their children's graduations, who called for advice on everything from contract terms to their kids' college choices, who trusted me with their corporate secrets because I'd proven myself through years of crisis management and weekend emergency sessions. Third, the industry connections that Bryce clearly didn't understand. Tuesday's Chicago M&A Bar Association meeting at the Standard Club, the monthly breakfast group of senior corporate lawyers at Riverside Golf Club, the annual Midwest Securities Law Conference where I'd been a featured speaker for 7 years running. My phone buzzed. Tony, my former supervisor, texting from inside the firm. Heard what happened. Emergency partners meeting Monday. Bryce announced that Taylor will transition into senior legal coordinator role. This is insane. I didn't respond. The NDA was vague about personal communications, and I wasn't taking chances. But Tony's message confirmed what I suspected. Panic was setting in. I spent the weekend researching and strategizing. By Sunday night, I'd transformed my dining room into a war room. 24 years of accumulated knowledge spread across the table. Not client files. Those belonged to Caldwell. But my personal notes, my methodologies, my regulatory tracking systems, the infrastructure that had made me indispensable. Monday morning, I created a new email address, dmorrison.consulting. Not a competing firm, just a professional presence. Updated my LinkedIn to independent legal consultant, M&A and securities compliance. No mention of Caldwell and Partners, no violation of any agreement. Then I waited exactly 30 days. That was crucial, showing good faith, proving I wasn't rushing to violate my agreements. During those 30 days, I watched from the sidelines as Caldwell and Partners began to unravel. Tuesday brought the Chicago M&A Bar Association meeting I'd been anticipating. The Standard Club's dining room was packed with the usual suspects, 47 of the most influential corporate lawyers in Illinois. I'd been coming to these monthly gatherings for 16 years. Dan Morrison, called out Jim Harrison from Harrison Industries as I walked in. Heard you've got some big news. Word traveled fast in Chicago's legal community. Within minutes, I was surrounded by colleagues, all curious about my sudden availability. I kept my responses vague but professional. Exploring new opportunities, I said repeatedly. Sometimes change opens doors you didn't know existed. You know what's crazy? The real conversations happened during golf the following Saturday at Riverside. Jim Coleman from Foster & Associates had invited me for their usual foursome. As we stood on the 7th tee, he cut straight to the point. Dan, I've got 4 clients asking if you're available for project work. Nothing that would violate any agreements, just independent consulting on regulatory compliance. By the 12th hole, I'd received similar inquiries from the other 2 lawyers in our group. Word was spreading that Taylor's coordination efforts were creating problems. Big problems. The first crisis hit during week 2. Sarah Rodriguez from Great Lakes Holdings called my personal phone at 7 a.m. on a Tuesday. Dan, I know you can't discuss Caldwell business, but we just received a compliance notice from the SEC. Something about our subsidiary disclosures. Taylor filed what she called a standard response, but the potential fine is $3.8 million. I'd seen dozens of these notices. The SEC had started aggressive enforcement of new subsidiary reporting requirements 8 months ago. Companies had 45 days to remediate or face escalating penalties. Sarah, I can't provide legal advice without proper representation, but as a friend, I'd suggest you get specialized securities counsel to review that notice immediately. Can you recommend someone? Send me the notice. No charge for a friend to take a look and point you in the right direction. The document arrived within minutes. One glance told me everything. Great Lakes subsidiary reporting wasn't compliant with the new federal standards. Taylor had filed a boilerplate response completely missing the technical compliance requirements. They had 9 days left to fix a problem that would take 20 days minimum to resolve properly. Sarah, you need emergency securities counsel today. This isn't routine paperwork. You're looking at potential criminal violations if this isn't handled correctly. Look, I've been doing this for 24 years. I know the difference between a minor filing issue and a company-killing regulatory nightmare. This was the latter. By Thursday of week 3, I'd received similar calls from 9 other clients. Each crisis followed the same pattern: complex regulatory issues, Taylor's incompetent responses, millions in potential exposure. Here's the thing. These weren't accidents. Taylor genuinely believed that AI software could handle SEC compliance. She'd actually told one client that their environmental disclosure templates were legacy thinking that needed digital optimization. Week 4 brought the call I'd been expecting. Patricia Wells, her voice tight with controlled fury. Dan, the TechFlow acquisition closed, but there's a critical regulatory disclosure issue. Taylor missed a new FTC requirement that went into effect last month. We're looking at an $18 million liability that should have been identified during due diligence. Our board is demanding answers. The regulatory disclosure, a new FTC requirement that had gone into effect 4 months ago. I'd flagged it in my personal deal notes, but those notes were in my files, not Caldwell's system. Patricia, I can't discuss specifics about your transaction, but after my 30-day restriction period ends next week, I'd be happy to review your situation as an independent consultant. Would Foster & Associates be interested in representing us on this matter? Foster & Associates, the boutique firm that handled sophisticated corporate work with a fraction of Caldwell's overhead. Jim Foster had been trying to recruit me for years, usually over drinks at the Chicago Athletic Association downtown. I think they might be very interested in discussing your needs. The 30-day mark hit on a Friday. That afternoon, I called Jim Foster, Dan Morrison. I've been wondering when you'd call, interested in discussing some potential opportunities. I think we might have some mutual interests to explore. Come in Monday morning, and Dan, bring your golf clubs. I think we need to have a long conversation about the future. Monday morning at Foster & Associates felt like stepping into a different world. Where Caldwell and Partners was all marble and intimidation, Foster's office had the comfortable efficiency of a firm that cared more about results than appearances. Jim Foster, 64 years old with 38 years of practice under his belt, had built his reputation by being smart instead of flashy. Dan Morrison, he said, standing up from behind a desk that actually looked used. I've been wondering when you'd finally leave that circus. I didn't exactly leave voluntarily. Bryce Caldwell called me last week, Jim said, his tone dry. Warned me about a former employee who might try to violate his non-compete. Suggested that any firm that helped you would face litigation. My stomach tightened. And your response? I told him Foster & Associates doesn't respond well to threats, especially hollow ones from children playing dress-up in daddy's suits. Over the next hour, Jim laid out his proposal, senior counsel position, not partner initially. That kept me clear of any non-compete issues. 65-35 split in my favor. Full malpractice coverage and litigation support when Caldwell inevitably came after me. The thing is, Dan, I've been getting calls. Patricia Wells, Jim Thompson, others. They're not happy with the service they're getting, but they're also scared. Nobody wants to be the first to jump ship and face Bryce's litigation threats. So, what are you suggesting? That we make jumping ship feel less like jumping and more like boarding a luxury yacht. That afternoon, I found myself at Riverside Golf Club, not for golf, but for what Jim called strategic coffee meetings. The plan was simple. Let word spread naturally through Chicago's business community that Foster & Associates was expanding their M&A practice. By Wednesday, the crisis calls were coming in faster than I could handle them properly. Sarah Rodriguez called with an emergency. The SEC had escalated their penalty to $7.2 million after Taylor filed another inadequate response. Sarah, I can't represent you while I'm still bound by agreements, but I know someone who can help immediately. Can you work with them on this? As of next Monday, yes. Thursday brought the call I'd been expecting, but dreading. Charles Caldwell himself. Daniel? The voice was older than I remembered, strained in a way that made me think he'd been getting similar calls all week. We need to talk. Mr. Caldwell, how can I help you? You know exactly how. My firm is hemorrhaging clients. 23 companies have terminated our representation in 3 weeks. This has to stop. You know what kills me? He actually sounded surprised. Sir, those companies made their own decisions about legal representation. I haven't solicited anyone. Don't insult my intelligence. This is coordinated. This is revenge. I thought about Bryce and his standing desk setup, about Taylor playing on Instagram while deals collapsed, about 24 years of loyalty repaid with humiliation. Mr. Caldwell, this is consequences. Your son replaced me with someone who thinks SEC compliance is automated software. A long pause. When he spoke again, his voice was smaller. I'll handle Bryce. Come back. Name your terms, full partnership, your own division, whatever you want. It's too late for that. It's never too late. I built this firm from nothing. I won't watch it die because of my son's mistakes. You know what? For a moment, I almost felt sorry for him. Charles had built something impressive over 48 years since founding the firm in 1976, but he'd also made the choice to step away and leave it in incompetent hands. I don't want anything from you, Mr. Caldwell. I just want to practice law competently for clients who deserve better than what they've been getting. By Friday afternoon, Jim was grinning like a man who just won the lottery. 28 companies have either terminated Caldwell or requested proposals from us. 28 out of what? 35 total clients, something like that. Dan, I've been practicing law for 38 years. I've never seen anything like this. It's not just that they're leaving Caldwell. They're specifically asking for you by name. The call that ended, everything came on a Tuesday morning, 12 weeks after Bryce had fired me. I was in my new Foster & Associates office, a corner space with actual windows and room for my law books, when my assistant knocked. Mr. Morrison, Channel 7 wants a comment. Caldwell and Partners just filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection. I turned on the conference room TV. The anchor was mid-sentence. Confirmed that the 48-year-old law firm has filed for emergency reorganization after losing approximately 80% of their Fortune 500 client base over the past 3 months. The firm's rapid decline is attributed to what sources describe as catastrophic management decisions by recently installed leadership. The screen showed Bryce Caldwell outside the federal courthouse, flanked by lawyers from crisis management specialists. He looked nothing like the confident MBA who'd fired me 12 weeks ago. The designer clothes were gone, replaced by a conservative suit that seemed borrowed. Dark circles under his eyes told the story of someone who hadn't slept properly in weeks. Here's the thing. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for him. He was still just 32 years old, thrust into a position he'd never been prepared for, surrounded by advisors who were either incompetent or afraid to tell him the truth. No comment, he repeated to reporters, but one journalist persisted. Mr. Caldwell, is it true that unlicensed staff were handling multi-million-dollar transactions? How do you respond to malpractice claims from 19 different companies? Bryce made the critical mistake of stopping, of trying to defend decisions that were indefensible. This is a coordinated attack orchestrated by competitors. Who? Are you referring to Daniel Morrison, the attorney your firm terminated 12 weeks ago? Another reporter interrupted. Sources indicate Mr. Morrison was responsible for maintaining relationships with most of the clients who have since departed. Can you comment on the circumstances of his termination? Bryce's composure finally cracked. We made strategic decisions about the future direction of the firm. Sometimes that requires difficult personnel choices. The camera zoomed in as he essentially confirmed on live television that my firing had been a strategic decision rather than performance-related, potentially undermining any remaining legal claims they might have had against me. Jim Foster appeared in my doorway, shaking his head. He just made his lawyers' jobs 10 times harder. It's painful to watch, I said. And it was, not because I felt vindicated, but because watching a half-century institution collapse was genuinely tragic, regardless of who caused it. 6 months later, I stood in my permanent corner office at Foster & Associates. I'd made partner after successfully transitioning 28 former Caldwell clients to our firm. Tony was across the hall as a senior associate, handling regulatory compliance with his usual methodical precision. My phone buzzed with a text from Austin. Dad, made. Dean's List again. Thanks for showing me that setbacks can become comebacks. Another from Patricia Wells. Dan, the board approved our nomination of Foster & Associates for Law Firm of the Year from Chicago Business. Well deserved. Even one from my mother's care coordinator. Mr. Morrison, your mother wanted me to tell you she's proud of how you handled your career transition with such grace. I sat back in my chair, looking out over Chicago's skyline. The Caldwell building was now occupied by a tech startup. Ironic, given that they had once claimed to be innovating the legal profession. Look, Bryce Caldwell had taught me the most important lesson of my legal career. Competence and relationships matter more than automation and disruption. When someone shows you who they really are through their actions, believe them. At 49, I wasn't just surviving my mid-career crisis. I was thriving because of the way I'd handled it. The golf games with clients at Riverside continued. The monthly M&A Bar Association meetings at the Standard Club remained productive. The relationships built over 24 years had proven more durable than any single firm's letterhead. That's what practicing law was really about. Not revenge or destruction, but competence, relationships, and protecting what matters. Sometimes that meant letting the incompetent destroy themselves while you focused on building something better. Even when building that better future meant watching a 48-year-old institution collapse because someone confused change with improvement and disruption with progress.